Hi, I'm Tim Mosso, watch specialist at Govberg Jewelers.
And I'm Josh Srolovitz, senior watch buyer at Govberg.
So today we want to talk a little bit about what makes a modern Rolex a Rolex, because Rolex has always been known for refinement. So between any two generations, for instance, Submariner, GMT Master, Sea Dweller, you may not see hugely pronounced differences, but when you compare watches built in the middle of the last century, like these Submariners and GMT Master, to contemporary production, all of a sudden, that's where the quantum leap emerges.
Absolutely, and it's part of the reason why Rolex has been considered all these years as the best and the gold standard of watchmaking, and why they are what they are. It's the methods they use to produce their watches, it's the materials they use, and it's the lack of
need to resort to anything that's not built in-house.
Exactly.
So now the thing about buying pre-owned Rolex is that you're talking about, first of all, here's the proof that a generation ago, make that several, this late 50s Rolex 5508 Submariner was essentially built to a quality such that it could endure to the present day. And that was without any of the refinements that you see on late model Rolex. Now today, you see everything from solid links to alloys that are milled, blended, forged in-house, proprietary ceramic, hairspring alloys. Could you tell us maybe a little bit about Rolex steel, just at the most basic level, how that's different?
Yeah, another thing that sets Rolex apart, they make their own materials in-house. Everything is done in-house. Instead of using generic stainless steel like you'll find on a like another kind of watch or refrigerator, you have 904L steel. It's a higher grade steel. It will not bend, it will not break, it will not shatter. It's just so well constructed, and it feels just so
it is
so
an
premium.
exceptional material, and it's a testament to Rolex spending the money to actually build a foundry in-house and develop its own metals. You know, people will say, well, I'm never going to plunge my hand into boiling acid. Why do I need 904L steel? The reason you want it is because it holds a polish better and it holds a satin brushed finish better, meaning the watch looks better longer. And that's really its key benefit to you and me.
Sure, and to touch on the foundry again, not only do they make their own stainless steel, Rolex also took it a step further to produce their own gold. They have a gold foundry in which they produce their yellow, their Everrose, excuse me, in addition to their white gold, which is special due to the lack of rhodium plating.
Now, conventionally in the industry, even today, this is a Rolex Cellini print in 18 karat white gold. Now, conventionally in the industry today, you'll see that white gold is typically a kind of dilute, milky yellow gold that's then plated with rhodium, or in some cases that are exceptionally regrettable, nickel. And that material will have to be perpetually replated every couple of years to restore the luster. The Rolex white gold is different because it is homogeneous. So if you were to scratch it, there's just more white gold underneath.
And a step further, it's also easier to take care of, to polish down the line when you're ready to do so. It doesn't have to be re-rhodium plated, and there's no disassembly required. It's just done right.
And this is one of the keys, because when you think about pre-owned watches, you're talking about a little bit of wear, a little bit of mileage on the wrist. And so choosing a brand like Rolex pre-owned makes a lot of sense because the watches are built for the long haul. And again, using only a fraction of the technology they have today, they created these vintage watches that I have right under my hand. These have survived the present day, functional and wearable. 10, 20 years down the line, these watches of contemporary construction are going to be even better, functionally and aesthetically.
And the amazing part is these pieces from the 50s, 60s, 70s, they work just as good now as imagine they did the day when they were originally sold. They're watches, they're tool watches meant to be worn under strenuous conditions. A lot of soldiers wore them at various wars. They're serious pieces for serious watch people.
And beyond that, now you take the essential mechanical integrity of those, there are changes within the watch that make contemporary Rolex references, you know, just a cut above. For one thing, like the outside of the watch, the inside of the watch is all Rolex. They make their own overcoil hairsprings, and not just overcoils, but in the case of the Parachrome blue hairspring, for instance, in this in-house caliber Daytona, it's robustly anti-magnetic.
Anti-magnetic, it doesn't succumb to gravitational pulls as easily, if at all. The amount of friction is extraordinarily reduced. It just has everything going for it. It's finely tuned. All the detail is there, and it just there's just
exactly. Sometimes some of these refinements are so fey it's hard to describe them. But how do you describe the pinion leaves of a movement when they've been polished to a gleam? How do you describe exhaustive micrometric roulage of the end of pivots. This is what Rolex does. When you open up the caliber case and you see a contemporary Rolex, you say, okay, it's well made, but now you put it under the microscope and you start looking at the places where metal touches metal, and it's on a surgical level or beyond. Everything from their own shock protection built for the movements, their own handmade Breguet overcoil hairsprings, like Josh explained, resistant to different positions and gravity, with the Parachrome blue alloy resistant to magnetism, with free-sprung balances in all cases, and full balance bridges now, so they're very shock resistant. Plus, there's the whole matter of actually making sure the watch is a chronometer inside its case.
Absolutely. And in addition to adhering to COSC or COSC standards, once the Rolex movement is confirmed to be within those specifications, they don't just case up the watches and ship them out. They actually go through their own testing as well. It's just a further testament to their quality and just why they're as highly regarded as they are.
Now, Rolex does lead the industry in chronometer certifications, but it's important to note that most of the manufacturers that do certify movements as chronometers, they send the movement bare. The movement's certified with the COSC as a chronometer if it meets the standards, and then it goes back and it's subject to handling, it's subject to installation, stressing of the plates as it's clamped into place, then the case is closed on it. By the time that movement makes it to market, it may be nothing like the caliber that passed the COSC in terms of performance. Rolex makes sure the cased up watch is still a chronometer as it goes to market, and that's a big distinction.
And in terms of the testing they put these watches through before they're released to the public, some of those deep CC dweller pieces, the devices they have to actually test these watches to pressures of 12,000 meters, they actually do that. And the fact that these watches can withstand that and are prepared to do that, if you're prepared to do that, it's mind-blowing.
Now, circling around to where this becomes relevant to the pre-owned buyer, it's important to note that all of these refinements, everything from the platinum-filled Cerachrom ceramic bezels to the special recertification of the fully cased watch to tests down to rated depth for the deep seas, that carries a premium. So, Rolex is going to be priced above the equivalent Omega, Tag Heuer, or Breitling in its class, but pre-owned watches get you back ahead of the game, and that's where it really makes sense because you're getting this late model technology at a discount.
Absolutely, and despite it being pre-owned, it's one of the safest investments you can make. One could even argue that it's a better investment as pre-owned than it would be as new. And when you buy from an authorized dealer who's backed by the brand, who has an authorized service center for Rolex in-house, it's a great package. The watches are backed with warranty. Some are even still under the factory warranty with Rolex.
It's the best way to buy a pre-owned watch. Buy it from the dealer that may have originally sold the watch. And in Govberg's case, that's often.
It is often. We have a lot of collectors who buy watches. They have a lot of pieces throughout their tenure as a collector. Something new comes out, they need to have it. And despite having had maybe this Daytona or the Sea Dweller 4000 for just a few months, they're ready to trade it back to finance their next purchase. And the reason they're able to do so comfortably and willingly is because these retain their value. They're worth their weight in currency. They're commodities, not just watches.
Yeah, Rolex, also spelled cash in many markets, is the watch that you can always resell to a willing buyer. Unlike some specialist brands, unlike some newer brands that have just emerged in the last few years, Rolex is an institution. It's a household name, and there's always a willing taker. Whether you're looking to sell a very vintage timepiece from Rolex or a late model, you're going to be able to convert that watch and turn it over relatively quick. If you decide, having owned it for a year, that you're satisfied and fulfilled, there's no watch that's easier to turn around and trade in for something more fun, something new, than a Rolex.
For sure.
So it's important to note, back in the days when these watches were made, the refinements were historic first. Rolex didn't invent automatic winding, but it did popularize and perfect it. Rolex didn't invent the water-resistant watch, but it did popularize and perfect it. And of course, the first watch with a 24-hour hand and a bidirectional rotating pilot's bezel was the GMT Master in the mid-50s. So those kind of firsts, those kind of claims to fame were the domain of Rolex back in the middle of the last century. Today, it's all about science, material, engineering, and just providing that extra measure of refinement beyond the typical watch in its class.
Sure, it's things you normally don't see unless you're a watchmaker or you're opening up your watch for some reason. It's Parachrome hairspring, it's polished components in the movement that make all the difference. It's a little bit longer of a power reserve on an in-house chronograph, which just sets themselves apart.
Yes, absolutely. So what sets Rolex apart isn't necessarily a giant exclamation point, a single standout showpiece feature. It's all of those refinements that add up collectively to an exclamation mark.
And every single part of these watches has a purpose. and there's no frills, there's no nonsense. It's just, they're serious watches.
Absolutely, and you get what you pay for with Rolex. When you buy pre-owned Rolex, you get that plus the peace of mind of letting someone else take the depreciation hit and putting your money into something that can be considered a cash equivalent at any point down the road. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Tim.